stories will thrive. Welcome to another video by the Blue Tongues of Hell for some more Hilda Chronicles. This chapter is called The Serpent's Egg. The sea breeze had a nasty bite to it. Ice was spreading, although still thin enough to crunch through. The Blade of Gold's crew was eager to return to the Isle of Vanaheim, but the longship needed repairing, and empty stomachs were whining. Odger found a safe route back to a volcanic island they had visited at an early stage of their voyage. He stated that if his lucky Haminya had kept him alive so far, there might also be a few trees left to cut down on Ormeyar, and possibly still food to put on their plates. The emerald ice was receding as they sailed closer to Ormeyar, and fortunately the central island's mountain looked asleep. Crystal waves lapped the hull, while Asmund was struggling not to drown in other distant icy waters, far away in one of his recurring dreams. He could see his father looking down on him from a drakkar named the Firecrest. Asmund was freezing to death in the northern sea, splashing about, trying to save his sister, who was lost beneath the waves. Off the shore belonging to Muspelheim, one of their sworn enemies.
"Hilda!"
he cried, knocking a hot bowl of soup out of Kyoko's hands. The burning sensation on his leg didn't bother him. It subdued the shivering that lingered in his mind. The air was strangely warm too, and soon the nightmare would ripple away. "Hilda?" asked Kyoko, wiping the bowl clean.
"My sister,"
explained Asmund very briefly. In a cove where they had moored up 2 springs ago, the carpenters would get to work on the longship's leaks at low tide. Asmund sent half its men to find timber, and the other to hunt or plunder. He led the resupplying team, with Kyoko trailing behind as his shadow. They hadn't encountered any trouble yet, and kept an eye out for spiteful locals as they walked over smooth lilac rocks and up a motley heather hill. Puffins burst out of hiding, and Kyoko shrieked with joy. The red-tipped arrows kept flying out to sea and didn't return. When Asmund reached the top of the hill, there were no seabirds left, and all was eerily quiet. The lush fields they had seen long ago were now sheets of soot. Either the volcano had bled over the island after they left, or the farmers had slashed and burned their lands. Asmund glanced up to the mountain that breathed fire and saw no smoke. The silence didn't augur well for them. Not even a dog bark could be heard as they entered a small village of bird-nest wicker huts. They saw no log fire smoke spiraling from the holes in the cone rooftops. The island felt deserted. "Shirokuma," said Kyoko softly, then cried, "Ice bear!" Asmund told her to keep her voice down, but the huge beast with a pink stained muzzle was already planning to exchange the old carcass it was gnawing for a fresh herd of warm meat bipeds. The archers behind Asmund didn't wait for orders and fumbled around clumsily in their quivers for arrows to shoot. The white bear stood on hind legs and grew twice its size. It roared at its prey, who weren't feeling as fiercely brave as when they had defied the insular natives. A growl of thunder and a chilling howl from beyond the mountains disturbed the great bear, and it bolted off between two burned-down huts. Asmund didn't feel that curious to know what had really saved them. Kyoko let Asmund and the others go rummaging through the huts that hadn't been torched and followed the bear's paw prints. She stumbled across more carcasses lying around. Most had been sucked dry by the Shirokuma or seabirds, but she could see they weren't dead seals or deer corpses. One small scorched body was stuck in the remains of a charcoal hut, reaching out for help. Another swollen one was filled with maggots. A woman's body. She didn't have a single claw mark over her rotting naked body, only clean cuts that a blade would leave behind. Kyoko was overwhelmed. She closed her eyes and covered her ears.
What is it, Kyoko?
Asked Asmund, with a basket of oats under his arm. She shook her head from side to side, shedding tears on the grey floor. Asmund pulled her hands away.
Kyoko, what's wrong?
Kyoko stared up at him in horror. "You did this," she said, pointing to a corpse with a jug forced into its mouth.
The peasants were being unreasonable. We had to keep the peace. And besides, Ormeyar is now part of Anaheim's kingdom.
Kyoko only saw the dead families who had suffered and begged for their lives. Children. Someone called for Asmund's assistance.
What is it, trolls? I'm busy.
The man holding shiny green scales in his palms reminded Asmund that his name was Paul. When the prince came to his senses, Kyoko had run away.
For hell's sake, come back! The ice bear went that way.
Kyoko sprinted through a wood of anthracite stumps, slid down a slope of coal and ash, and tumbled onto a nest of black branches. She climbed out and ran up a burnt loaf surface that felt elastic under the foot. She heard nothing of Asmund's desperate calls as she skipped over narrow cracks that glowed in the baked earth. The tormented voices in her head would not go away. How could the Asmund she thought she knew be so cruel? Out of breath, Kyoko stopped running. She panted and pressed her palms above her grey knees, realizing how dry the air was. She was close to the shoreline and could see peculiar black torii gateways sticking out of the warped rock surface. Kyoko thought she was just tired, but the gentle waves seemed to be getting closer. She observed the hills around her, and they looked like the island had once melted, or black cake batter had been poured down the mountainside. It definitely was moving. A puff of hot air belched out of the ground close by, and Kyoko hurried down to the torii gates. The tide was going out. Mussels and oyster shells covered the polished rocks, and armies of dark crabs scuttled out of Kyoko's way as she stepped under the slanted posts of scorched wood. The archways were like oily whale spines, with tar thorns running up their sides like snapped-off buttocks from a ship's hull. Kyoko touched the warm timber, splattered in white excrement. These were mangled shipwrecks. Something else attracted her attention. Green petals on molten rocks beneath a cliff of black glass. Walking over to the shimmering rock face, she didn't find petals but metallic emerald scales. They were littered all over the ground like breadcrumbs, and she followed the trail. At the foot of the cliff, the black crust floor was slimy as bladder-wrack. A sinister stench overpowered the shores already strong scent of sulphur and seaweed, and Kyoko masked the lower part of her face with her hand. She heard a horrid hissing sound in the distance and decided not to stick around much longer. That's when she noticed a mysterious glimmer coming from a dry rock pool in the slippery reef. Just a peek, and then she'd return to the longship and pretend as if nothing happened. The glimmering light came from a large oval object, green as the metallic scales. An egg. Kyoko knew she had to get out of there. With an egg that size, the mother must be. Not one cloud was nested in the sky, and yet the whole reef was suddenly drowned in shadows. A monster! Something massive slid before the low sun. Kyoko recognized the hiss, and Thor snapped off elmwood arrows in the serpent's scaly green neck. It was back again, and she was as helpless as the poor farmers had been. Unless... Kyoko dashed into the rock pool and threatened to strike the shimmering egg with the translucent black rock. The sea serpent wailed and violently flicked its tail, splashing through the shipwreck gateways. It slithered angrily around the egg nest, crashing into the cliff, ripping off obsidian rocks in showers of lime scales. As soon as it opened its jaws wide enough to gobble an ox, Kyoko thought of Asmund. She saw tiny holes at the tip of its fangs, and knew it could douse her in venom at any time. Her overacting only enraged the mother, who brought her pink, glistening mouth so close to Kyoko that she could smell its last meal decomposing in its gastric juices. Hopefully not Ulf's torso. The serpent combed through Kyoko's hair with a long milk fang, and surprisingly nudged her arms. The gentle push caused a drop of acid to leak from the snake's tooth. Kyoko grimaced, but she didn't let go of the rock as the poison sizzled on her thigh. A soft hiss of warm air crept out of the huge shiny gullet, and a forked tongue slapped her cheeks and shoulders, urging her to move away from the egg. Kyoko's arms trembled, and she wondered why the sea serpent didn't just snap her head off. The gaping jaws were ready to swallow her up in one bite, but they just hovered over her, dripping seawater onto her face. Kyoko's arms were getting weaker, and the rock was slipping through her sweaty fingers. The serpent wheezed as she peered into the fleshy chasm. There was scarred tissue and purulent wounds on its palate, and she saw a few arrows obstructing its throat. Kyoko almost felt sorry for the beast. She decided to roll the dice and gently lowered the heavy rock. The serpent jerked its head backwards and hissed, dribbling venom onto the reef, then thrust its fangs forwards again, pressing one against Kyoko's lips and chin. Kyoko held the rock against her hip with her right arm and delicately reached into the green serpent's mouth. It moved back and forth again, burning Kyoko's wrist with droplets of acid. But the snake let her continue to slide her hand over its sticky glottis as it widened its jaws. The stench was now unbearable. Kyoko showed her upper gums in disgust, but kept reaching for an arrow. She had one at her fingertips, quivering as the serpent wheezed its foul breath. Lower teeth dug into her ribs as she stretched her body as far as she could. And when she had a firm grip around one of the elmwood arrows, a man's loud cry of alarm drove the serpent away from her. Acting betrayed, the green serpent and belted off in coils of violence to eviscerate the intruder. The snake's backward thrust made Kyoko slip and drop the rock onto the egg, but it didn't leave a scratch. Kyoko scrambled out of the rock pool and saw Pal, who'd come looking for her. Neither its screech of fear nor jagged dagger prevented the serpent from crushing Pal's plump body into a lifeless pulp. Kyoko hardly had time to catch her breath, and the serpent was onto her again. This time its thick tail protected the shivering egg, and Kyoko didn't stand a chance. She extended a hand unconvincingly to remind the foe what she'd been trying to do. But it hissed, flared its neck, ready to strike. The serpent wrinkled its nose and swayed backwards before plunging. A wheezing hiss was building up like a geyser about to burst, and Kyoko felt paralyzed. Her loins tingled as the serpent's head rose above her. There was no escape. Asmund roved over the lava slopes in search of Kyoko. His lungs hurt whenever he breathed in deeply, and he covered his nose with his forearm. The familiar voice of Pal squealing had led him this way, but he was feeling disorientated, dizzy even. He had to get away, and lethargically let the mountainside carry him down towards the shore. Having a coughing fit while leaning on a burnt post wedged in the crunchy floor, Asmund's heart stopped when a bolt of lightning struck the island nearby. The clear sky rumbled, and he felt the lava field shake beneath his boots. At the top of a small cliff of black mirror stone that gleamed, He peered over the edge and gulped. There she was, sitting on the reef, surrounded by the roasting flesh of a mutilated sea serpent, like the one that had disfigured him. The serpent's split coils were writhing in spasms. They frizzled with blue webs of light that squished the snake's meat to bubbles of green mark. Kyoko was motionless. It had all happened so quickly. The imminent feeling of death, the fork of lightning, the green shower of flesh and blood. She stared out to sea, draped in a film of metallic green and goo. She couldn't feel the sun, and she didn't see Asmund come to her rescue, or the other sailors pick up the serpent's egg and take it back to the ship. Kyoko remained mute until the evening bonfire on the beach, where the blade of gold was being repaired. A soothing dip in the sea had almost rid her of the faint emerald shimmer, although Asmund and the others found it quaint. A mermaid after all, they would say light-heartedly, filling a large copper bowl with serpent yolk and egg white to cook over the fire. Kyoko huffed and tapped Asmund's hand. "Let me," she said, stealing the stick he was holding to whisk the egg herself. Later on, gazing at the stars on a lilac rock, Kyoko imagined the yolk running down her throat and coiling its way through her body. She followed with her eyes a path in the stardust and pictured the shape of an enormous snake slithering between a bowl and a fork. Sitting around the bonfire, everyone watched her comb her hair and stretch her neck up to the heavens. Asmund realized the journey back home was going to be harder than he thought. 6 full moons later, food had been gathered. Bodies had been buried in the Bird Nest village, and the Blade of Gold was ready to set sail. What the Norsemen hadn't paid attention to was the rising heat of Ormeyjar. The volcano was still quiet, but the warmth had tricked them into resting longer than they should have, whilst the seas beyond the Serpent Isles had already frozen. Odger cursed at his stupidity, and consequently at Asmund's too, for being too leisurely in the presence of his mermaid. The frustration and squabbling wouldn't change the predicament they were in. Either they walked back home on ice, or stayed put on an island that was due to explode at any moment.
Men, we have to face the music here. There's a wall of ice out there. And Vanaheim will have to wait. Better get your arrows and axes sharpened, though, for the ice bear season is open.
Asmund didn't sound too troubled. The thought of a warm winter at Kyoko's side drew a smile on his lips and dissolved all apprehension of having to speak to his father again. The others didn't share his relief, and they all grumbled as they set off to go egg hunting. See you soon for the next chapter of the Hildar Chronicle.